We begin our study this week on the self and family by looking at Mishnah Peah. There's no Jerusalem Talmud on this Mishnah, only Babylonian Talmud. And the Mishnah may be one which you sound familiar to you. For some people, it is part of the earliest part of their morning davening, morning tefillot. It says as follows. Elu dvarim she'ein lehem shiur. And you'll notice, by the way, it's in Hebrew. That's a good indication that this is a Tannaitic level text. If it's in Hebrew, if it's in Aramaic, it's going to be a later text commentating on the Hebrew. So these are things that have no definite quantity. That is to say, there are things in the Torah that the Torah tells us we have to do these things, but doesn't tell us exactly how much, right? So it's Peah falls into this, corners of the fields, because we're told to leave the corners of the field unharvested so that the poor can come and glean from it, right? But what constitutes a corner of a field, right? Is it one stalk? Is it 50? We don't know. That is to say, the Torah doesn't tell us, and the Mishnah is now listing those things for which there is no defined quantity. The corners of the field, first fruit offerings that are brought to the temple, Gemilut Chasadim, right? Good deeds. It's not like, I reached my cap for today, But also there's no minimum quantity, which is interesting. And Talmud Torah, okay? The following things are things which a man enjoys fruits in this world while the principal remains for him in the world to come, okay? So you enjoy something here and later. First on the list is Kibud Av Va'em, honoring one's parents. Then again, Gemilut Chasadim, making a peace between a person and his friend, and the study of Torah is equal to them all, okay? We don't have a chance to look at all this. Right now, we're going to focus mostly on Kibud Av Va'em, on honoring one's parents. And then we'll probably jump towards the idea of studying Torah, which in a totally different context. So first I'm going to ask Cheryl to tell us about the word kibud. What does kibud or kaved mean?
Kaved or kavod?
Both.
It means to honor.
Okay. And what else does kaved mean?
What else is kaved?
Something is heavy.
Heavy, yeah.
Heavy. Which is an interesting.
Also means liver.
Okay. So ignoring the liver piece for now. Yeah. It is interesting. It is interesting that the word for honor is related to the word for heavy. And the idea seems to be that honoring someone is actually a very heavy responsibility. Right? This is a difficult thing to do well. And so it weighs on us. Okay. And you should also remember that the mitzvah of honoring one's parents falls between the mitzvah between people and people and God, right? It's number 5 on the list of 10 commandments, which sort of puts it in a very high place. Yeah.
In Hebrew, when you say kibud, is also like refreshment or, you know that word in Hebrew? That is the word that you use if you're having a party or something and you lay out a spread. It's called kibud.
I believe you.
Thank you.
I don't know what to do with that though.
I'm honoring your guests. Well, maybe, I don't know.
All right. So the Talmud jumps in a couple pages later. Kibud Av Va'em, honoring father and mother. Rabbi Abahu said the name of Rabbi Yochanan. They asked Rabbi Eliezer, to what extent must one go to honor father and mother? Okay, so like if this is something which the Torah doesn't tell us, what does this mean? Like how far do we have to extend? This is exactly what Talmud's asking. So he says, okay, go and ask Dama ben Netina, a non-Jew, by the way. Now this isn't all that uncommon, that to what extent, what's the of this? Well, go look at this example and they give you narrative. But the easier answer is to give a line of this is what the halacha is, right? To what extent? To the extent that until it kills you, right? They could do that. But rather they tell a story here. And we're going to see there are going to be lots of stories. And to some extent, I think this is already telling us that every family is going to be different. This is a situational ethics question, right? So you actually can't give a codex answer to it, right? You can't say, this is what Kibud Av Va'em looks like in every situation, because you can't deal, every situation is really going to be different within families, as we're going to see. So what happens? Dama ben Netina was the head of the city councilors, okay? It was sort of like the mayor. Once his mother hit him in front of his entire council, and the slipper with which she hit him dropped from her hand, okay? And I want to thank Runley in the office for helping prepare all the source sheets. And so thank you, Runley. It takes a lot of time, and I edit, but I don't always catch some of the typing errors, so apologies for that. Also, English is her second language. So she whacks him in front of everybody, and the shoe she uses falls from her hand. So what does he do? He bends down and picks up the slipper, so she wouldn't be troubled to having to do so, okay? For the record, for this, my mother is in the room with us, and she would never do such a thing.
But if I did,
would you pick up the slipper?
Yes. Rabbi Hezekiah said to her, this is one who is strong, right? Chazak. He was an Ashkelon Gentile who was head of the town council. During his entire life, he never sat on the stone seat in which his father would sit. When his father died, he treated the stone as his god. Okay, so another rabbi comes in and says, this guy that you're talking about, remember, non-Jew, and not only did he have respect for his mother, he also had respect for his father. He never sat in his father's seat, even after he was gone. Okay. Another story. Once the jasper stone representing the tribe of Benjamin and the high priest's breastplate was lost. So remember, the breastplate of the high priest had 12 stones, right? And one of them falls out, buried in the sand somewhere, no idea where it went. Rabbi said, does anyone have a gemstone to replace it? Anybody? Anyone have jasper? Turns out they don't, but they said, Dama Benatina, right? The guy who we just read about, he has one. Okay. Good guy, very, he's the mayor, he has jasper, good guy. So the rabbis, they sent a group to go to him, and they say, we hear you have a jasper, we want to pay you 100 dinarim for this jasper, which is a pretty good price for a stone. Dama went and wanted to bring the jewel to them, but found his father was sleeping. Some say the key to the chest in which a jasper stone was stored was attached to his father's fingers, and some say his father's leg was resting on the chest. Either way, he can't get it right now without disturbing his father's sleep. Okay? Dama returns to them and said, I can't bring the stone to you. And note, he doesn't give an explanation as to why. The rabbi said to one another, perhaps he wants more money. They raised their offer to 2,000 dinarim, and he declined. Okay, so 20 times, and they say no. He says no. When his father woke up, he went down and he brought them the gem. They wanted to give him the amount of money they had offered him at the end, or whether 1,000, I think it's 1,000 in the Aramaic. And Dama would not accept it them. He said, shall I sell my father's honor for money? I won't benefit even slightly from honoring my father. Wow. Okay, any thoughts on that story, even though we're not quite done yet?
The one question that jumps out at me, it's his father's gem. So he doesn't want to take any money because he's fearing that he'll dishonor his father. But if he takes what I conceive to be the gem of his father, is he not dishonoring him?
So that's, I think the way, at least certainly the way I've always read this story and the way it seems to generally be read is that it's his gem, like his father happens to be like near it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so obviously it would be problematic if it was his father's and he stole it.
But why would he ask him? I mean, if it was his father's, wouldn't he ask
Presumably.
him permission to take it? And
presumably in this
sell it or
situation,
give it?
he would, yeah. Roz.
Oh, it's not pertaining to this comment, but the part about the stone seat on which his father would sit, when his father died, he treated the stone as his god. My mother-in-law would never let anybody sit in my father-in-law's seat after he died. And I always just thought it was her quirk, but she was very frum and very knowledgeable. And I'm sure that's where she took it from.
That's a real thing.
Revelation, yes.
I think Beth Emmett has a spot for Louis in the third row.
Oh, for Louis, well, there's a nameplate.
A nameplate there, but no one sits there, right?
Yeah. Well,
I think my father's.
yeah, Ruhama sits there, and
Okay.
if somebody comes to sit near her, they all might sit there, but you're right.
And Cheryl is saying,
I said, my dad's seat.
Right, so Davka the opposite. Some
Well,
people,
to me, because he sat there, so I feel.
Yeah.
right, you feel him there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's why I sit in that seat.
So I have a seat for both my parents and my friends who I sit with all the time will not sit there in those seats. I'm allowed to sit there, but they aren't.
Mhm.
I'm not sitting in those seats.
So there's some situational piece here, right? Because you feel, not only do you feel your father's presence, you probably also think that this is respecting your father on some level.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas situationally here, there's a feeling you leave it the way it is, and that's the respect that's shown.
Yeah.
Okay. It's also interesting that they're bringing first, which is a place of respect, the story of a non-Jew, which is, I think the rabbis are telling us that this is, though it's in the 10 Commandments for Jews, this is actually a universally practiced custom and probably is incumbent on non-Jews to some extent in any event. Okay. Okay. How did the Holy Blessed One reward him? Yosef ben Rabbi Buna said, that very night his cow produced a red heifer, and all Israel paid him the cow's weight in gold to buy the cow. Rabbi Shabtai said, it is written, God is great in power and just and abundant in righteousness. God does not delay. The Holy Blessed does not delay paying the reward to a Gentile who performs a religious duty. Okay, it's interesting that the focus again back to the Gentile, but also this notion that when you do things, when you do the right thing and there's a monetary loss involved, you're going to be recompensed. Right, so that night he gets this red heifer. Right, they're very rare, and the Jews really want it, so they buy it for him for the 1,000.
Or does it imply that he's getting, because he's a Gentile? If he was a Jew, it would be sort of, he was doing the right thing, so he wouldn't have to get paid back.
Well, if we look back to the Mishnah, at our first source, right, where does Kibud Ava'em fall in? It falls in to the second category. Elu devarim shadam ochel peratem ba'olam hazeh, v'ken kayem lo l'olam haba. That is, these are things that for which you get fruits here and the interest later, the original later. So there is some sense you actually should be getting something here. Whether it's monetary, otherwise, we don't know.
Do they not have this in their
Religion?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Maybe they do. And certainly the rabbis are intimating that this should be important to them. And clearly for him it is.
Yeah, clearly if it's something that the Gentiles are doing and it's important for them, how much more so should it be for Jews?
Right. There's a whole Masechet of Avodah Zarah, which talks about mostly relationships between Jews and non-Jews. And there's it's a fascinating tractate, and maybe for another time, especially the way it begins. First few pages you could spend a year on. It's really great stuff. Okay, so now we're going to move our attention to character number 2, and now we're within the Jewish world. Rabitar Flynn, his mother, went down to take a walk in her courtyard on Shabbat, and her slipper falls off. So again, the slipper, right? And this is not uncommon, right? This is how, and remember, in an oral culture, right, there are sometimes little, what's what I'm looking for, like hints in the text to link one thing to the next. So you remember the slipper from the first story and you get the slipper into the second. Even to the extent of texts which we think of as being written texts, but were actually oral texts to begin with. So if you look at the very end of Chronicles, Divrei Hayamim, and then you look at the very beginning of Ezra, very close. And it's really telling you that this one follows that one. Okay. So her slipper falls off in Shabbat. And presumably they're outside of an Eruv situation, right? So she can't just go and pick it up. So what does Rabitar Flynn do? He places 2 hands under the soles of her feet so she can walk on them until she got to her bed. Okay?
Right.
This is not an easy thing to do.
Right. And because it's Shabbat and they're outside the Eruv, he can't pick her up and carry
Right. He also can't pick her up and carry her, just like she can't pick up her shoe. Or maybe he would pick up her shoe.
Why can't she pick up her shoe?
So on Shabbat, we're generally not allowed to carry things. As a general, outside, we're not allowed to pick up things and move them more than 4 amot,
Or arm's length.
No, it's not arm's length, it's 4 arms lengths. Anyway, that the rabbis came up with a halachic fiction, right, a legal fiction, by putting up this string around a certain area or a fence, and basically turn that area into a private domain, even though it's not really, and to put a meal in there also. And that allows one to carry. But obviously they were outside, they didn't have this at the time, or wherever she was, so she is not allowed to pick it up and move
It's
it.
her courtyard, so wouldn't that have been?
And also, how far could she have walked without a shoe?
So courtyards on Shabbat is like the most complicated subject in the entire Talmud. Because depending on who else she shares the courtyard with, changes what she is and is not allowed to do on Shabbat. Right, you already studied Eruvin. Daf Yomi already covered Eruvin. So my mother's actually more of an expert on this than I am. But you need a lot of diagrams. But the assumption is, look, the basis is, for whatever reason, she can't get her shoe back on. I mean, that's really the important thing here. Once Rabitar Flynn became ill and the sages came to visit him, his mother said to them, "Pray for Tarfon, my son, who pays me altogether too much honor." What? She's sort of complaining, like, my son, he's too much. They replied, "What does he do for you?" She repeated the story to them. They said to her, "Even if he were to do 1,000,000 times as much, he would still not have paid you half the honor of which Torah speaks." So what's the conclusion of the story here? How much is too much? No such thing. Okay. Even to the extent that the mother seems to think it's too much, right? So it's not just like the mother's indifferent to it or she likes all of it. She's actually feels like this has gone too far. Okay. Now we have the opposite. The mother of Rabbi Yishmael came and complained about him to our rabbis. She said to them, "Rebuke Yishmael, my son, because he does not treat me with honor." Okay. She reports him to the honor brigade and says, make him better. Yeah. At that moment, upon learning this, the face of rabbis turned red. They said to one another, "Is it possible Rabbi Yishmael does not treat his parents with honor? This is Rabbi Yishmael. He's up there with Rabbi Akiva. This is a big guy." They said to her, "What did he do to you?" She says, "When he leaves the Beit Midrash, I want to wash his feet in water and drink the water." Yes, I know this sounds gross, but for her, she wants this. Now we can speculate as to why, right? That maybe the dirt of the Midrash is holy and she wants it as part of her. They don't go there. That's probably what it is. Something about the Torah within her own body, okay? But he does not let me do it. They said to Rabbi Yishmael, "Since that is desire, that is the honor due her." Okay? She wants this?
Maybe he sees himself as honoring her by not letting her do this
Right.
sort of gross thing.
Right. And so maybe, yeah, exactly. So maybe he thinks he is doing the right thing already. And the rabbis say, actually, no. It seems that the moral of the story is, whatever your parents want, that's the thing that you have to honor them by doing. Certainly, okay, and we're clearly dealing with something here which is permissible. There's nothing forbidden about drinking foot water. Assuming we don't think this is dangerous.
Yeah.
And she's not breaking Shabbat, she's not murdering anybody, she's just drinking something gross. Okay. Rabbi Mana said, "The millers are so right when they say everyone's merit is in his own basket." Okay, so that's exactly what we're saying. It's about the person, what they think, what they want. And this comes up in a lot of different situations. There is elsewhere a story in the Gemara about a certain rabbi who was very wealthy and was used to being the wealthy guy with his horse and chariot and runners and all those things. He lost all his money, and it was told to the community that they actually owed him having some of these things, that he should continue to have runners in front of him when he traveled, right? Because for him, not having that was a great sense of loss. And that made him feel poor in a way which he shouldn't feel poor. But the Gemara also says, or hints at, I don't remember exactly the language, but he should know better than to ask. right? Like you owe him something, but he should also say, you know what, I'm not going to take up community resources with that. I can be poor like the rest of the poor, not like the rich poor or the previously rich poor. The mother of Tarfon said this to the rabbis, and they responded thus, by saying that Rabbi Tarfon could never pay his mother the full honor due her, and the mother Rabbi Yishmael said this to them, and they responded thus, she was due the honor she wanted for herself. Okay. Any thoughts? To each his own, including what is owed by the children. Okay, so now we're going to take a. Yeah.
Doesn't the parent have an obligation to teach their children the Torah?
Absolutely.
And if so, in this particular case, is she teaching her son the wrong concept of honor? Or do they have different concept of what honor is?
I'm going to ask everyone who is watching from home to please make sure that you are muted. We can hear you on this end. Thank you, including those who are calling in on the phone. I know there is a way to mute yourselves. So, Jeff, you were saying that she didn't teach her son properly in terms of honoring parents.
Right.
Maybe, although these are cases which it seems like this didn't come up before, and they just don't know what the halacha is. He's going overboard. There's no such thing. He won't do the thing that I want. Do the thing that she wants, even though it's crazy, right? It's case law. It just hasn't come up before. Okay, so now we're going to take a break from the Jerusalem Talmud and hop over to the Babylonian Talmud. Often there are either parallel passages in both or complementary passages. And actually, the next thing we're going to see, number 4, comes up more than once. Like these things, that's the way it is. We just had a long time talking about the construction of the Talmuds. But you have to remember, this is primarily still an oral culture, right? So stories end up in more than one place, sometimes with more than one version. I think actually you can see something here. And the rabbis at some point said, we have all this great material, we need to get it down. And so they use the Mishnah sort of as the organizing principle for all of these pieces that already exist. And they put it together using the Mishnah as sort of thing. Okay, this is related to that. Let's stick it in here. Okay. Rav Asi had an elderly mother. She said to him, I want jewelry. And he made jewelry for her. It's a very impressive guy. She said to him, I want a man whom I can marry. He said to her, I will seek one for you. Okay, he's looking for a shidduch for his mother. She said to him, I want a husband who is as handsome as you. At this point, now this is the commentary of the Davidson Talmud. This is in the non-block print, right? She's senile, something's wrong, like he doesn't know what to do, right? So what does he do? He gets up and goes to Eretz Yisrael. Okay?
That's a good sign.
He runs away. He runs away.
Yeah.
What happens next, though? She heard that she was following him to Eretz Yisrael, right? He goes, he doesn't show up the next day. She starts asking around, where's my son? Where's my son? Oh, he was on the train, And so he hears that she is planning on coming. So what does he do? He goes to Rabbi Yochanan, who knows better than he does, and says, do I have to leave Eretz Yisrael to go and greet my mother? Okay. Generally speaking, it's understood that once you're in Israel, you're actually not allowed to leave. Okay, that's the basis for this. And so he wants to show respect to his mother by greeting her, right, by meeting her halfway and bringing her in. Question is he allowed to do such a thing? And the other thing, like you're not allowed to honor your parents if they say break Shabbat. That's what I want you to do for me, right? You're not allowed to break Shabbat to honor your parents. So too, you wouldn't be allowed to leave Israel. Okay. And Rabbi Yochanan says, no, you're not allowed to do it. Rabbi Yossi for the rest is one going to greet his mother. What is halacha? Rabbi Yochanan said, I do not know. Sorry. Okay. So first, are you allowed to leave permanently? No. Are you allowed to leave to greet her? I'm not sure. Rabbi Asi waits. He comes back and he asks Rabbi Yochanan again. Right? He said, I'm not sure. The first time he thought maybe Rabbi Asi thinks maybe Rabbi Yochanan looked into it. Yes, his Rav, whatever. But Rabbi Yochanan replies, listen, I get a sense this is important to you and you're eager to do this. Okay, may the Omnipresent return you in peace. right? That is to say, you can go, and hopefully everything will be okay. Little foreshadowing here. Rabbi Yossi came before Rabbi Elazar. He said, because a little unclear with what Rabbi Yochanan says, right? So he says to Rabbi Elazar, God forbid, perhaps he's angry with me that I wish to leave. Rabbi Elazar said to him, what exactly did you say to him? Rabbi Avi said to him, may the omnipresent return you in peace. Rabbi Elazar said to him, if it is so that he was angry, he would not have blessed you. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan certainly gave you permission. In the meantime, so he takes all this to say, okay, I'm allowed to go and greet her. He goes. And what does he hear? He hears that it's not her who is coming, but rather a deceased mother who is coming in a coffin. Okay. He said, had I known, I would not have left. That is to say, had I known that she was already dead, I wouldn't have left Israel to greet her, which is an indication saying that certainly your obligation towards parents after they're deceased is fundamentally different than when they are alive. Right? Obviously, there's still an obligation to bury, et cetera, and usually the primary obligation falls on the family in any event. But it's a very different than the obligation to honor a physical person who is alive. What else do we take from the story before we move on? Aaron, are you trying to say something?
Yeah. If your parent, your parents or a parent is beginning to show signs of dementia, is running away honoring?
I agree with your challenge. that is already a problematic thing to do. Now, the dementia piece is read into the text, right? That's a commentary on it. Maybe it's not dementia. Maybe she's just extraordinarily difficult.
In which case, if you don't do what she says, the appearance is you're not honoring your parents. So you're in between a rock and a hard place.
Yes, definitely. I think that comes up a lot of places here, that we have a clash of values, not to mention the public nature of a lot of these things. And which value do we prioritize? Right? Is aliyah better than honoring parents? Right? These are challenges within the halacha that I think they're trying to figure out. Ross.
Does this open the door to contravening a parent's last wish or instructions after they're gone? I want you to do this. I want you to keep this. Does it have the same pull?
So that also falls into what we're going to do a little later, because there's a question as well about making vows.
Yeah.
Right. So it's one thing to be problematic to dishonor your parents. It's another thing to break a vow.
Not breaking a vow though, just death wish or following instructions.
So there are times, so I think it's still a vow to some extent, even if you don't use the words, but then it's just a lie, right? Especially if you know at the time when they say, will you please keep this whatever forever? And you say yes to make them feel good, knowing fully well that you're never going to do that thing. There are times when we are allowed to lie. I think I was talking about this from the pulpit the other day.
Yeah.
That, right, the example that the Gemara gives is that a bride on her wedding day, you're supposed to sing in front of her how beautiful she is, right?
Yeah.
Even if that's not the case.
Yeah.
Which is particularly, it's funny because today that section of Gemara has been turned into a song, right? And people sing it in front of the bride on her wedding day. Like don't you know, like you're basically saying, I may be lying to you when I tell you I'm beautiful. It's like reminding her.
Maybe she's on her wedding day, she's probably as beautiful as she's ever going to be.
Right.
So
Probably.
With respect to the story we read about Rav Asi, whether his mother was, in dementia or not, clearly he felt that she was demanding something that was not deliverable by him, was making him a little crazy perhaps. And for his own personal mental health, he thought, I got to drop this and get out. So his own health, mental health took priority for him over trying to honor his mother's wishes.
Yeah. And I think we have to be serious about, if we're talking about health and being a priority in Judaism, the mental health is there. Also, by running away, let's say that he shouldn't have done that, okay? Or he was obligated to find her a husband who was handsome as he was, okay? By not doing that, arguably, let's say he is not honoring her. But by then disappearing, he is avoiding a situation in which he is once again going to fail to honor her, right? If he stays there, she's going to keep on asking ridiculous things, and he's going to keep on not being able to do them. And that's perhaps worse. Whereas disappearing, okay, maybe it's not quite so bad.
But it's also funny, like where you draw the line, right? I mean, he made her jewelry, he did all the other things, but when she wanted a husband as handsome as him, that was the line. Did he think he was so handsome? Standard,
Yeah, what I didn't do is look into what he looked like if there are observations somewhere else.
Yeah, maybe he was like really special. Yeah.
I do see that people are chatting, which is great. I'm not looking at the chat. It's too much to do for me to be able to engage in the chat. So if you want to engage in the conversation, please do by speaking rather than typing. Okay. So now we're going back to the Jerusalem Talmud, the continuation of where we broke off, source number 4. Rabbi Zera had been distressed, saying, would that I had a father and a mother, whom might I honor and so inherit the Garden of Eden. Okay, so he's an orphan, and he doesn't have the opportunity as an orphan to fulfill this mitzvah, right? And we know there are 2 mitzvot in the Torah, for which one is said to have a olam haba. It's kibud av va'em, it's honoring parents. Anyone know the other one?
Rescuing the bird, something.
Bingo. Not rescuing the bird, shooing away the mother bird before you take the eggs. Okay, and in As a Driven Leaf, Milton Steinberg talks about a situation that one of the rabbi's witnesses, a father telling his son, go climb the tree, shoo away the bird and get the eggs. The kid does that and shoos away the birds and falls and dies. And this was a major issue of belief, etc., for the rabbi who saw this. He was in the middle of performing the 2 very commandments for which you're supposed to guarantee a long life, right? Which is the way that he interpreted it. It's not world to come, but a long life, which is the pshat of the Torah, and yet he dies. Okay. But when he heard these 2 teachings about Rabitar Flynn and Rabbi Ishmael, he said, it's right to the earlier teaching with the hands on the feet and this, right? Blessed be the merciful one that I have no father and mother, I not be able to act as Rabbi Tarfon did, nor could I bear what Rabbi Ishmael did. Okay? That is an understanding that, you know what? This is really hard. To do this properly is really hard. So I would rather not be obligated and they're exempt than be obligated and try to do it and therefore get my reward. This is really hard. And in fact, Rabbi Avun agrees, I'm exempt from honoring father and mother. Right? When his mother conceived, his father died, and his mother died during childbirth, again, an orphan. Okay. Final source that we're going to deal with today on this topic. There's a person who feeds his father fattened birds, which is a good thing, but inherits Gehenna. And there's a person who puts his father to work grinding at the millstone and inherits the Garden of Eden. Okay, so how does this work? So for the first one, fattened birds, there was a man who fed his father fattened hens. Once his father said to him, my son, where did you get these? And he says, shut up, old man. Just like the dogs are quiet and they eat, you be quiet. Okay, so on the one hand, he's doing great things for his father. On the other hand, he's obviously disrespecting him.
Yeah, just the scroll.
Yeah, the scrolling doesn't work as well as it should, which we tried to fix earlier today. And second is a story in terms of the millstone. how does the son put his father to work grinding the millstone and yet inherit the Garden of Eden? There was a man grinding millstone when a military draft came. The grinders, right? So they come and they basically say, we're picking you, you, and you, or one from each family. The son said to the father, "Father, come and grind in my place. If shame comes to those drafts to do the king's work, better it should come to me than to you. If lashes come, better to me than to you." So the son basically says, "Dad, I will go with these guys. I'll join the military. You do this work that I'm doing, even though it's not great work. It's better than going to the army." And that way he was able to inherit Gan Eden. Why do you think it finished with this story, with these two stories?
It's very complicated.
No, I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly the point.
I think it's context too. I mean, you know, it's not always face value. What it looks like on the surface may not be what it really is.
Also shows two different ways in which your parents.
Yeah.
Two different
I think,
styles.
Two
I
different
think
styles.
it's not just the act or the nature of the act, but the way the act is carried out.
Yeah, so it's not just a physical thing, like I now have a fattened bird in my stomach.
Yes.
It's exactly that. I mean, think about Rambam and his hierarchy of charity, that fits into it as well, right? It is better to receive the thing by someone who's smiling than to receive the thing by someone who is, angry to be giving it up.
Yeah. Well, there is some honor in feeding his father, but it was a matter of respect and disrespect when he spoke to him the way he did. So honor and respect are two different things. And he maybe attempted to honor his father, but he showed him no respect at all.
Yeah. Anyone else online? Go ahead.
Yeah, Rabbi, I wonder about the father doing the work. I mean, it reminds me of something in my own history and the importance of my father feeling that he was being productive and wanting to do something as opposed to being dependent. And whether it's menial work or it's the kind of work that would be admired by many, it doesn't really matter if that's the work that the father is prepared to do to feel that he's doing something productive. And I think parents generally don't want to be dependent on their kids, and this is probably a case of that. And that's, I think, honoring your father and his wishes, expressed or otherwise. And that's what I would take from it.
Hey, thank you, Ron. Anyone else? Going once?
Rabbi, I'm still having problems with the man whose mother lost her slippers or her shoes.
Yeah.
Why he's not going to be at great distance from her, and you indicated that there was a small distance which could be part of what one was permitted to do on a Shabbat. Why couldn't he just ask her to move over closer to him and put her slippers on?
So I think the assumption is that would have been some sort of violation, that they fell off and maybe she kept walking. I think that's the basis of the story. But even if it's not, he would still seemingly prefer to do what he did than tell his mother to do something, right? Or just as easily he could have picked up the slippers and given them to her, right? But he doesn't do that. So I think we have to assume that he was not allowed to do that, because we also have to imagine that it would be better for her to walk in slippers for her than to walk on his hands. Because if it was always better to walk on someone's hands, then that's actually should always be the case, rather than footwear to begin with, for people who have children who can do such things.
It just seems to be bizarre.
It is very bizarre, and that's the point.
Yeah.
Right? They want to bring an extreme example because that tells us, right? And in the end, it's not even a millionth of what he owes her. Okay.
So is
and by the way, remember, Rabitar Flynn is lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, right? It's not up to you to complete the task, nor are you free to desist from it. right? So he gets this mentality eventually that I really have to just keep going. Yeah, go ahead, Bernard.
So is the idea of presenting an extreme example an attempt to indicate some kind of limit, like you could go so far and no further?
I mean, that's exactly, they're trying to establish a limit because there is no limit given in the Torah, the upper limit or the lower limit. So he has this question, or at least the Gemara includes this question, this story. Whether the story is true or not is irrelevant, but it includes it because it's trying to establish that fact, right? What is this too much? And the conclusion seems to be no, it's not too much. Now, there are other stories in the Bavli about parents who take their kids' money and throw it into the sea, and what you're supposed to do with that. And in those cases, it's easier to look at it and think some sort of dementia. But I left them out because I wanted to do at least 2 different areas at a time rather than one. Okay, so let us turn ahead to page 8, and we're going to start looking at a different situation. So this is a relationship not between a person and his or her parents, but rather a person or a husband and his wife. So a couple thoughts before we begin. One, just remembering the obligation to one's parents is not just honor, it's also reverence, right? There's kibud, but there's also yirah, fear, and that's a separate mitzvah, and it has different it's different than honor. And for our sources yet to come, the Talmud was written by men, and its presumed audience was men. And I think it's just important to have in mind when we go through these sources. It's not to say that the rabbis didn't understand women in a certain way or whatever, but that's how this came to be. Okay, they still don't.
Not enough for our friends.
I've heard that, yeah.
Okay, so we start off, this is actually the Mishnah, okay? So you have Hillel and Shammai, they're the Mishnah. They're always going to be in the Mishnah. But the Mishnah is always quoted in the Talmud, which is why you have here 61b. Yeah, that's where this is. In the Mishnah itself would have a different pagination. So this is the bottom of page 8. With regard to one who vows that his wife may not derive benefit from marital relations with him, Shammai says he may maintain the situation for up to 2 weeks, but beyond that he must divorce her and give her the payment for a marriage contract. If Hillel say he must divorce her if he continues beyond 1 week. Okay, so I'll stop there. A man has an obligation to his wife to provide certain things. This is actually in Ketubah, and it's based on a situation in the Torah where a man takes his second wife. Says, okay, you're allowed to do that, but you still owe the first wife the following. And if you don't provide those things, she can require you to divorce her. You're not holding up your end of the bargain. You're not giving me clothing, which you have to do. You're not giving me food, which you have to do. You're not putting a roof on my head, you're supposed to do. And you're not having sex with me, which you are obligated to do. Therefore, I can get, the wife can get her end of the ketubah, right? She can get the payout, if you will, if he refuses to participate. Bearing in mind that men have the obligation for procreation, women do not. But men do have an obligation to bring pleasure to their wives, which is understood generally rabbinically, meaning to have sex with their wives. And the section which we skipped over today talks much more about that in detail, and you can look at it yourselves. Okay, so now they're going to go further into this. Students may leave their home. So it says, if a man takes a vow, it says, I'm not going to sleep with my wife, basically so he can learn Torah, presumably, right? Which is a whole other, which is where we're going to get into the clash between the home house and the house of study. He can probably, it's either 1 week or 2 weeks he's allowed to restrain. Beyond that, he's not allowed. Okay. Students may leave their homes and travel in order to learn Torah without their wife's permission for up to 30 days. Laborers may leave their homes without their wife's permission for up to 1 week. The set interval defines the frequency of a husband's conjugal obligation to his wife. Say in the Torah, we can look it up, we're not going to. Unless the couple stipulate otherwise, varies with blah, blah, blah. men of leisure, right? So men who have not a whole lot else to do, they have to have sex every day with their wives. Or now there's an assumption here that this is something, of course, that the wife wants. Right? If she says no, she's not interested, what have you, or I think we're going to see it in these texts. Maybe it's in the previous ones, I don't remember. Fortunately, I learned a lot. Then obviously the answer is no. And Talmud's very clear about things like marital rape, etc. The answer is no. Yeah, laborers twice a week, donkey drivers once a week, camel drivers once every 30 days, sailors once every 6 months. Right. So why are sailors once every 6 months? They're away.
Yeah, they're not here. Okay.
Right. And presumably she married this guy knowing he was a sailor.
Right.
Just like a donkey driver, the guy's going to be gone. Camels go further, which is why it's long, right? Okay. But for longer than that, you have to ask permission because she is deserving of having her husband around. Now, the lens that this starts off on is a lens of sex, right? But I think that there's something deeper that I want to have in mind as we go forward. It's not just that issue. It's the idea of having a husband who's going to be there for you, companionship, etc., versus a husband who's just gone all the time. Right? So this could mean that the guy shows up every night between, midnight and 2 and disappears again, but he's really not there for you. Okay.
As long as he has sex.
As long as he has sex, he's okay. And I actually think the Talmud's saying that's also not okay. I think this is a lens. Because there is no obligation from the Torah to play cards with your wife, right? Or to read quietly in bed together. There is the only obligation aside from providing her things that are physical is providing your body to her. Okay. This is as is related about Rav Rechumi, who would commonly study before Rabbi in Mechoza. So Mechoza, we mentioned last time, is one of the 4 major cities, of which there was may have been a house of study. Whether the house of study probably came about after the Talmud's time, but there was certainly some circle of learning going along. So what is Rechume? What does that sound like to you? That's his name, Rechume? Rachamim, which means? Compassion, and it comes from? Rechem, womb, right? So famously, Jews took the word rechem, womb, and came up with rachmanut, and came up with being compassionate. The Greeks took the term for womb and turned it into hysteria, right? So here's a man who's literally named after the attribute of compassion. And do you remember when Ruth Calderon was elected to Knesset? This was within the last 10 years, in 2013. Ruth Calderon was elected to Knesset. She is a scholar, a secular scholar in Israel. And in her maiden speech to the Knesset, she stood up there and she taught this piece of Gemara. Okay, and go online and find it. It's an amazing speech, the whole thing. Unfortunately, the election which happened after that, she wasn't high enough on the list, and Yesh Atid got decimated. Okay. And actually, there's a funny moment in it when I think it's the Speaker of the House interrupts her. She's talking about Rechem, and he also says, it's equal to Ramach, which is 240, and someone sort of shushes him, and she says, no, this is how we learn. This is good. I'm happy he's doing this.
What's her name again?
Ruth Calderon. And you can find, if you Google it, Ruth Calderon speech Knesset, there's one which has English subtitles. Okay. But if your Hebrew's good, you should listen to the Hebrew because it's very nice.
Yeah, probably translated into.
Okay. So what happens? Rav Chume would study with Rava and Mechoza. And he was accustomed, regil. Sorry. He was accustomed to come home every year on Erev Yom Kippur. So this is already actually problematic, it seems, because what's one of the things you're not allowed to do on Yom Kippur?
Have sex.
Is have sex.
And you're also, they can leave their home for up to 30 days, not for a full year.
Correct. So now we're seeing, okay,
That's without their wife's permission.
Right. So exactly. So maybe there's some consent here. We don't know. And also, I think because of Yom Kippur, maybe there's some sort of intimation that it's the proximity and being together which matters more than the sex piece, because he can't have sex with her Yom Kippur. Right, so I don't think that in the context of the whole story is that I don't think that holiday is chosen randomly. And also, of course, it's a very solemn day, right? So it's not about having a chance to dance with your wife on Purim. It's the solemn day of the year. Okay. But what happened one day, so one year, he's engrossed in halacha, he was studying, and he forgot to leave, right? In the meantime, his wife is expecting him. And she's standing outside, thinking, now he's coming, now he's coming, he's gonna be here. Does this remind anyone, by the way, of anyone from Tanakh? He's coming, but he never shows up. Chapter 4 of Judges. Actually, no, it's only chapter 5.
Well, not in chapter 3, so,
Sisera's mother.
Oh, right.
Right?
Yeah.
Sisera is killed by Yael with the tent peg,
Oh, right.
and she's looking through her window,
Yeah.
expecting him to come.
With all these wonderful prizes, yeah.
Okay. But in the end, he doesn't show up. She was distressed by this, and a tear fell from her eye. The English here is passive. The Hebrew is active. The Aramaic is active. That is, she allowed for the tear to come out. It seems as if she's been welling up for a long time, and she finally let her express itself. She had some agency here. At that exact moment, Rabbi Humi was sitting on the roof. So what's Rabbi Humi doing on the roof?
Probably praying.
He's praying. He's learning. He's cooler. He's under the stars. He's with God. Right? She's far away. He's on the roof. She cries.
He does.
He does.
There you go.
He prays, he does.
Okay. So what's the moral of the story?
I don't understand how they're supposed to fill out the mitzvot if you're supposed to be fruitful, multiply if he's never there.
So it's possible that they're both older at this point. Right? The obligation,
Okay.
conjugal relations, it goes throughout the marriage, irrespective of the
And
age.
she's
Yeah.
sick of him and she gave him permission.
It's also important to remember that in rabbinic Hebrew, bayit doesn't just mean home, it also means wife.
Right.
Right? Those two concepts are interchangeable.
Yeah.
So what's the conclusion of the story here? What's the moral?
Go home to
Good
your
to your
wife.
wife, happy life, happy life.
Happy wife, happy life, exactly.
Yeah.
And the whole other piece of Gemara we're not going to get into, which talks directly about that, but you're also supposed to ask a husband on his wedding day, which is a disaster. But yeah, but not just happy wife, happy life. It's like a death, right? They're saying you don't do this. It's as if something has died. Now in this story, he mamash dies. Again, it's a story. It's used for rhetorical purposes. It's not like God came down and said, you're being a jerk. That could have been the conclusion. A bat kol came from the Shemayim and said, next year, don't screw up. In fact, I'm punishing you. You're suspended from living for 1 year. You have to go live with your wife. It doesn't do that.
Live with your wife.
Again, written from the rabbis, the male point of view.
Because it would take them away from Torah.
Yeah. Right.
It's like a death. It doesn't get worse than this.
But literally, I mean, in those times, if you think about it, obviously there was no communication and
Yeah.
Well,
she wouldn't have known where he was or how he was. I wouldn't have heard him for.
Well, it's like the
a long
other-
yeah, well, we're gonna see that exactly
Oh, okay.
in a
It's like
second.
the other story with the guy's mother died, he didn't know either, so I mean, how would he have known that his mother died? 'Cause
Well, he did hear, right? He does get a messenger. Like, people were going back and forth. We know
It
this.
took years to get out there,
Yeah,
so.
but we know people went back and forth because the Talmud tells us the rabbi learned in Eretz Yisrael and then teaches back in Babylonia, which is an indication that people, in fact, left Israel. Okay. So the next section, questioning, okay, we're talking about Torah scholars and their wives. What is the ideal time for a Torah scholar to fulfill the conjugal relations?
That's your Friday night.
Yeah, Rabbi Yehuda said, or Shmuel said, the appropriate time for them is from Shabbati to Shabbati, Friday nights.
Yeah.
And he based it on the pasuk from the beginning of Tehillim, that in English, that brings forth its fruit in its season. Okay? And because pru or vu talks, so the language of fruit that ties into sex and the season, and so they understand it as being, and Shabbat is an 8, so they understand it as being weekly on Shabbat. Rabbi Yehuda said, and some says Rabbi Huna, and some says Rabbi Nachman. This refers to one who engages in marital relations from Shabbat to Shabbat. Is related for the Yehuda, son of Rabbi Akiva, and son-in-law Rabbi Yanai, would go into the study hall, and every Shabbat Eve at twilight, he'd come to his house. So he doesn't help with the cooking or cleaning. He shows up for dinner once a week on Friday night. Otherwise, he's gone in the Beit Midrash.
Dinner and sex. Dinner and sex.
Yes. And what would happen? So when he would be leaving and showing up at the house, Rabbi Yanai, his father-in-law, would see a pillar of fire preceding him. Now we could do all sorts of analysis on why is there a pillar of fire preceding him? What does this represent? It says here, because of his sanctity. Others, I think, read this as his burning passion, right, for his wife. And fire is upright. Maybe there's a phallic symbol there too. Okay. One day he was engrossed in halacha, and once again, just like the previous story, here's a guy who forgot to leave. Okay, he was too bound to what he's doing. And by the way, to this day, if you are writing a Sefer Torah, you have to stop midday on Friday to get home. Not to get home so much, but because it's something which is so engrossing, you might continue writing into Shabbat.
Oh, okay.
So that you have to stop that, and that would be a real problem. Not just your wife is missing you; now you're writing on Shabbat Torah. I mean, that'd be terrible. Okay. So what happens? His father-in-law Rabbi Yanai doesn't see the fire, and he says, "Turn over his bed," which is something someone dies in times of antiquity, or this is a little after antiquity. They would literally take his bed and turn it over as a sign that this person has died. And he said that's because he assumes the guy died. His son-in-law. Reasoning, if he were alive, he would not have missed this time to come home. And what happened? What he said became, quote, like an error that proceeds from a ruler. Okay. Hashalit. Yehuda dies. Okay. So he says these things. And like a ruler, once you say something, you can't take back your words, right? We think about the Purim story, right? Achashverosh changes his mind. He doesn't then send out saying, cancel the edict. He says, let the Jews fight back. Right? Once it's out there, it's out there. You can't change it. And as a result of these words, he dies. Okay.
You think if somebody heard the story of somebody else, they'd get the message here.
Yeah. So any thoughts on that story?
Complex.
So again,
Entertaining.
Yeah.
It's another story about
Very unforgiving.
very unforgiving. But in this case, what's interesting, it's not that his failure to show up causes his death. It's the words of his father-in-law that caused the death. So what's the difference between those things? Why? Because that's really the only difference between these stories, aside from the interval being 1 week versus 1 year.
Well, it's not that he's necessarily causing pain to his wife in this case. I mean, we would assume she'd have some pain that he didn't show up, but it's somebody else who's
Right.
the intermediary.
Yeah, and she's not standing outside looking and waiting. Of course, it's Shabbos, she's busy, cooking and cleaning. But I think what this is telling us is that there is more here than just at stake than just a relationship between a husband and wife. That not showing up, not being around is a public thing. People know when the man of the house isn't around, and they're going to start talking. And that's like a death. That's what I take from it, because otherwise, what's the purpose of this story if it's just saying the same thing as the last one?
Well, it would be shameful, and his wife would suffer from that
Yeah.
shamefulness.
Yeah.
And also the father-in-law was protecting his daughter.
Yeah.
He was being protective of his
Or
daughter.
he's trying to be, but he actually kills
Yeah.
her husband.
It doesn't work out so well, but yeah.
Okay. All right, so we have another story. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi arranged for his son to marry a daughter of the household of Rabbi Akiva. Okay, so this very important guy arranged for his son to marry. When he came to write the marriage contract, the girl died. Okay, so he's getting ready, and then doesn't happen. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said, is there, heaven forbid, some disqualification in these families? Like, presumably God interfered here and killed her because there's some reason why they shouldn't be getting married. They said, and of course, they don't really care. It's not like her life matters by itself. It matters here in the context of everything else, right? She's an agent. She doesn't matter by herself. So what happened? They look into the family's ancestry, and they realize Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he's a descendant of King David through his wife Abital, whereas Rabbi Akiva was descended from David's brother. Okay, so that's part one of this story. They're not asur, they're not forbidden to each other. Right, this is many, 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 many generations later.
Yeah.
So what's the problem here?
Yeah. What was the conflict between David and his brother?
I don't think there's a conflict. It's just that David was royalty. His brother isn't. That's royalty.
Royal.
That's one way of reading this story. I don't know any other way to do it. That is, something would have been wrong with his marriage because they came from different classes.
Oh, and they weren't allowed to do that?
But they were brothers, I mean,
Yeah, but King David is King David.
It was so distantly related by that time.
yeah, but one was a prince, even then, one was the prince, well, I guess they didn't have princes.
Yeah.
He was like an appointed, never mind.
Yeah, and I don't know a whole lot about Shimi. I didn't look into him.
They're so distantly.
Yeah, this is many, many, many generations after King David. So it's not an issue of
Consanguinity.
consanguinity. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was going to say endogamy.
What?
Endogamy.
Oh,
So what do we learn from this? It makes no sense.
I think we can look at the next story also because it's part of the same piece. But up to this point, I think it's really challenging. And it seems to be saying that if you want a marriage to succeed, you have to come from sort of equal families. But then Rabbi Akiva, who's the last story in all this, undoes everything. We have to get to Rabbi Akiva. So what happens? Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi then arranges for them to marry a daughter of the household of Rabbi Yosef and Zimra. Agreed for him that they would support him for 12 years to go study in the study hall. And afterwards, they get married. Okay, so they find him a nice wife, and the fathers agree. He's going to go learn for 12 years, and then he's going to get married to her. But they actually let him take a look at her first. Okay, he takes one look at this girl and says, "You know what? Let's make it 6 years." He cuts it in half. But this is a serious thing. He really wants to marry her. She's good looking. She's good midot, whatever it is. He wants her. They bring her by a second time. I want to marry her right now. And then I'm going to go to study. Okay. He was then ashamed to see his father, right? The story basically says he really wanted to have sex with her, and it's embarrassing that he wants to marry her so quickly. But his father actually brings a beautiful proof that basically says, you did just like God did. Originally, God said, you're going to worship me in the temple in Jerusalem, which is going to take them a long time because they're just the beginning of their wilderness journey from Egypt to Israel. And then God later says, they can build me a sanctuary in the desert itself. Right? God makes it so they can have that relationship earlier. And of course, there's lots of metaphors about Bnei Israel and God being husband and wife, et cetera, et cetera. Okay.
just tell me to watch the time.
Yeah, I can see it's 3:10. So what happens, he does come back after 12 years, and it's a great line, but ultimately it said maybe he can remarry because she's barren by this point, but that wouldn't make her look good, him look good, so ultimately she's able to have kids. Okay. We are going to jump to the Rabbi Akiva story. So this is on page 12. And I hope everyone at home, you'll email me afterwards if the screen was really important to you. But if you all have it because it was emailed and you have it on your screen anyway, or you printed it, that would be great, just to let me know. So this is page 12 in the middle of the page. So this is the famous story of Rabbi Akiva. So he's a shepherd of Kalva Savua, who is a very wealthy guy. Akiva is unlearned, very poor. But the daughter takes a liking to him. And she says, I'll marry you. Or if I marry you, will you go and learn? Okay. And according to some sources, he's 40 years old already. He says yes, and they privately become betrothed. Father's unhappy about the elopement and kicks her out of the house. Says, yeah, and you're never going to benefit from me in any way, shape, or form. So what happens? Rabbi Akiva leaves. Pardon?
He kicks his daughter out, but the other guy goes to study. It makes sense.
Yeah. In the meantime, she's very poor. Her husband's not supporting her, her father's not supporting her. She's presumably quite destitute during this time. So he goes and he learns for 12 years. By the time he comes back, he has 12,000 students. Okay, so he's obviously learned and become a teacher and has this amazing following.
So I guess the coming back after 30 days of Torah study
Doesn't apply here.
Right, so in this case, we're going to get to that. And in the meantime, he overhears once he comes back, someone saying to his wife, like, and how long is this guy going to leave you like a widow, right? A widow of a living man. And she says, if you listen, I would send him back another 12 years. He doesn't bother saying hello. He just goes back 12 more years. When he came back, comes back, he now has 24,000 students. His wife hears that he's coming back. Her neighbors say, let's lend you some clothing so you can look nice for him. And she says, a righteous man understands the life of his beast. She's referring to herself as the beast, which makes it more okay. But basically, like, he's righteous. He'll accept me however I am. When she came to him, she fell on her face and kissed his feet. The attendants pushed her away. They don't understand the relationship here, right? His students don't know who this woman is. They've never met her before. He says to them, leave her alone. My Torah knowledge and yours is actually hers. Shali v'shalachem shalahu. Right? Everything that we've accomplished in the last 24 years together is all because of her. Were not for her, we wouldn't have any of this. In the meantime, father heard that a great man came to town. He said, I'm going to go to him, and maybe he'll nullify my vow. He's having regrets that he cut off his daughter. He came to Rabbi Akiva and says, did you vow? And Rabbi Akiva says, did you make this vow thinking that this guy would be a great man? He doesn't recognize Rabbi Akiva. He says, if I believe he would know even one chapter or even one halacha, it wouldn't have been so harsh, right? He's really feeling badly and he's had a chance to reflect on his life, etc. And this is basically saying, it's not about being Rabbi Akiva. He's actually saying at this point, the class situation, the learning situation doesn't matter. I shouldn't have done what I did to my daughter. It's okay to marry who you want. All he has to have is a little spark. Pencil a yid in there, and he's okay. He said to him, I'm Akiva, right? I'm the guy who married your daughter, at which point Kalva Savua falls in his face, kisses him, and he gives him half his money. Right? So this is back to the very beginning story about getting money, right? For honoring parents, right? So now we're talking about being a husband who learns Torah, now he gets money. And then we learned that Rabbi Akiva's daughter did the same thing for Ben Azai, right? That is to say, Ben Azai went in to study and she was all alone. And the U follows the U. Okay. And we can actually skip the last piece here. So what do we take from all this? It's a man's world, Rosheim says, okay?
I'm nothing in the religious party that's changed anything, I don't think, over the years.
Care to expand?
No.
No, it's just like you said at the very beginning, you have to look at the lens through which it's viewed.
Yeah.
Except some of these women, I mean, this one seemed very, pleased that he was off studying.
Right, well,
Seemed to be
But
regretful.
did she
Right.
say go
She-
away for 12 years?
And then
Yeah.
another,
No, it's not.
I don't think she specified the number of years, but she said, go and learn.
Yeah, go and learn.
Come back
So-
and.
So it seems that her consent is important here.
yeah.
It's one thing if your wife says, go and learn. It's another thing when you leave the house to go and learn and she's still sleeping.
Yeah.
She doesn't know.
Yeah.
Why 12 years? What was the thing that's done for 12 years?
Gives you bigger standing in the community, you've got more.
No, but there were
Why
12
12 and
years.
not 10? I
Oh.
wish I
Several
knew.
times it's
Something
12,
like that.
12, 12.
So it doesn't say anything about the 12 years before she gives him permission to go off and study. So maybe she thought she'd see him once a month.
But she also told him that they had a daughter, right?
Where's the daughter?
At the end, it
Yeah.
says that his daughter married a rabbi and did the same thing.
Yeah.
His daughter, didn't say it was her though.
No, it is. The you is a,
Come on.
it is.
There's somewhere, right?
It's his daughter and her daughter.
Yeah, yeah.
Somewhere in there.
So somewhere they had a child.
But
Could
then
have
he was
had a
84, right?
Yeah.
They were lucky they had a daughter.
Yeah, I just sort of
After being married 24 years, and he was finally living.
one
with her.
child.
They had one
Well, he was
child.
84, if he was supposedly around 40, but anyway,
The,
Doesn't make any sense.
never mind.
whether these things could happen or
Yes.
did happen
Yeah.
is secondary to the,
Right.
what it's trying to tell us. And
I believe in that community, it probably does happen.
Well, it's very interesting because the men suffer consequences because of what they do. But it doesn't seem to be out of respect for the women, it's out of respect for the relationship or out of respect for the law, for the
Yeah,
halacha.
the studying.
You know, but
everything else,
it's
yeah.
never said, it's because the woman is upset or the woman is whatever.
well, she's standing out there saying, when's he coming? He's coming. I think that that's meant to develop pathos in the reader.
Yeah, that one.
Goes,
But maybe that's the punishment for not coming.
you've
For
got to,
that time that he never came.
don't,
Yeah, on the phone? Yeah, Sid?
okay. Don't you have a conflict, Pruavu, learning Torah, who supported the wife? You got a ketubah that probably was broken. This is, where I think we're trying to sort of cover the surface and not go into it.
So go into it.
Go into it. It does, a lot of it doesn't make sense. True, what is worth more, Torah study or not? Akiva had no education and went and got educated. His wife supported him. Who supported her? I mean, this is whole give and take and not having kids. I mean, you could sit here for a day if you want. And as I said, the ketubah is probably, as far as his obligations to her, is probably out the window.
Well, she hasn't claimed it yet, right? You're right. She could have probably come to a Beit Din and said, "You have to force my husband to divorce me. He's not
If you
around."
back up, right? Hillel said 2 weeks or 1 week without sex, and she's entitled to a divorce.
Yeah.
Here you got 12 years. Now, whether he had summer break or not, we don't know. The assumption is no.
Because he had a child.
No, well, the child
The
provisionally
child was
showed up later.
after because she was infertile. She was infertile, and then they had to.
No,
pray for
that's
her
someone else.
to
That's a
become
different-
fertile.
She wasn't.
The fertility issue is a different story.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think you're right, that the assumption is, I think it's reasonable to assume that the kid showed up after his 24 years away. It's also reasonable to assume that he consummated the marriage on the wedding night.
Oh, so that child was like.
So
Yeah.
maybe, if that resulted in a child, then by this point, she's, 23 and 3 months.
Then being infertile wouldn't be part of the story.
No, that's a previous story.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah. But clearly there's this challenge here, right? The fertility piece is important to it, but I think that the base of the story is the rabbis all assume they could have kids later. And the procreation piece, the obligation's on the man, right? And men can have children later in life than women. And so maybe he would, get a second wife or get rid of this one, and et cetera.
Where does the idea that they consummated the marriage and there was a child from that?
It's not in the text, but because one is, that's what you, on halakhically speaking, I mean, that's
what you're supposed to do on the.
And there's no mention.
No mention of
It's
it.
between the lines.
Yeah.
Is it also, could it be also because the family relationships, whether it's your parents or your intimate relationship, people see you as you are, whereas your business associates or, everybody else outside the home, you can say, oh, I'll take a shower, I'll put on my makeup, I'll wear a nice dress, and, I'll be okay. But if you're 3 years old and you're asking about Shabbat candles and you do it repeatedly to your parents, that's kind of like your parents have that relationship with you and you give them honor for it, because it's not as if a neighbor came over and, shared challah on Shabbat, right? It's just such different intensity of a relationship. And maybe it's the same with a husband and wife, because we're also taught, on Purim, like how does someone express themselves? Through money, through substances, and through anger. And if you're in a family, you see all those three things all the time. So that's just my 2 cents.
Okay. I'm not sure I totally understand what you're getting at. But yeah, there's certainly a different level of relationship between a husband and a wife than any other kind of relationship. And the Kitzur, I think, yeah.
Sorry, I was just thinking, if you're raising a child, the child will come to you and say, why is this person not taking the bus? And you have to explain social and racial discrimination to a 5-year-old, right? So that's kind of like a level of parenting that the child honors once they're able to be the bar mitzvah or name, right? Once they're able to take on the responsibility of honoring the parent. Because the parent, it's such an enormous responsibility. It is so difficult. It's not like you give a birth to an egg, the egg hatches and off they go. There is such a tremendous level of respect and support between parents and children. And yeah, that's kind of like my point, but it's just my 2 cents. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Marta. So just to sort of bring us all back together, and I do encourage everyone to take a look at the sources we didn't cover today. And I didn't learn them with the Davidson piece in there, so I'm curious to know what that says, with the non-bolded type. But it says with parents and children, it is complicated, and there is potentially an infinite obligation, while at the same time, you can't be in a position where you can't live your life, or you're surrounded by people who are going to make you crazy. And maybe you could go, but that also potentially has consequences. But at the end, I think it says this is complicated, and no one's ever going to be able to do this properly 100%, because that's not within our ability. And the second one, it's really trying to draw out that Shalom Bayit is an important Jewish concept. We think that learning Torah is the most important. Actually, it's not. And that failure to provide a home in which the Bayit is happy is akin to death. Now, the Bayit herself might have the right to say, go ahead, you're welcome to leave. But this is a story about Rabbi Akiva, right? We're not Rabbi Akiva. So going back to the mission that started us off, and then the breakdown that follows, that's really what people should be aiming for, and should be aiming for, or the opportunity for a husband and wife to be together, we should be aiming for, not every 12 years or once a year. But the exception should be with the Mishnah that a husband says, I vow for the next whatever to not be with my wife. The regular thing should be that they are together. And in fact, not only should it be regular, I'm going to tell you what that means. Because sometimes when the Torah doesn't tell us, we allow ourselves to exaggerate. And that's not good for anybody. So thank you all for joining. I'm going to turn off the recording. And we are coming together again next week at 2:00 on Wednesday. We'll be discussing relationships between Jews and the Jewish community. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you, Anna Ginden.
I've got a comment.